Alrighty, good morning, everyone. I don't know whose idea it was to start a conference at 8:30 a.m., but here we are. Kind of reminds me of the meme where it's like, there's dozens of us, maybe a dozen, but it's early. I know people are still rolling out of bed, rolling into the conference. My name is Chris Barnard. I'm president of ACC. Glad to welcome you to the second day of the Energy Imperative Summit. Yesterday, we had Governor Cox open the summit for us, sketching out a vision of how we can use energy addition for the common good. And then we began to sketch out some of the three main pillars of our Energy Imperative Summit: tech-neutral permitting reform, capital deployment, and then finally, innovation. Today, we'll continue those conversations. Shortly, we'll be joined by Thomas Hochman and Congressman Harder talking about some of these issues. And then I'll be moderating a panel between Senator Armstrong and Congressman Peters, bipartisan panel, looking very much forward to that. And then various other leaders from the private and public sector for the rest of the day. So we'll just get started and go from there. Thank you all for being here.
Well, thank you to everybody who woke up early in the morning and also braved the rain here. This should be a lot of fun, and thank you, Congressman Harder, for being here. So for those who don't know, Congressman Harder, chair and founder of the Build America Caucus, bipartisan caucus that is focused on all things housing, all things energy, and of course, permitting reform is a huge piece of that right now. It's also something that I think probably all of us in the audience have been thinking quite a lot about lately. So to kick us off here, how does Build America Caucus want to engage in this current permitting reform moment? Right now the focus is on the Senate, but hopefully if there's success over there, it'll come back to the House side at some point. So how are you all thinking about all of this?
We want to get a deal done. It feels like we've been Lucy in the football on permitting reform for almost a decade now. We've been perpetually at the 1 yard line and haven't made it into the end zone. And that's really why we created this caucus. We've got 20 Democrats, 20 Republicans. We've got progressive Democrats all the way to some of the more conservative members on the Republican conference, really just united on how do we make sure that energy permitting gets done. We need more energy. And it feels like we used to have two parties that cared about growth and opportunity in the United States. Now it often feels like we have zero. And so our caucus is trying to unite both parts of the two parties that care about building more. And so our goal is trying to do the impossible in a polarized and unproductive Washington and swim upstream and to try to find that sliver of a chance, which I think is actually quite higher than a sliver, but still definitely not easy, to make sure that we can get a deal done as soon as possible that can build the energy that we need, fix all of the bottlenecks across our permitting process, and ultimately lower costs and get the energy that Americans want.
So there are a number of different pieces of this package: NEPA, transmission, relatively well known as components of this, but now Clean Water Act and National Historic Preservation Act over the last few months. High level here. Of course, Build America Caucus, bipartisan caucus. Where do you think Democrats and Republicans need to find compromise on their sides here for this package to pass?
I think, honestly, the policy details here are not all that complicated. We've known what the contours of a permitting deal are going to look like for years and years. The missing ingredient is trust. And it was trust a couple of years ago, and it's trust right now. A lot of Democrats don't quite believe that the Trump administration wants to build more energy, especially more wind and solar. We've had folks, I was very excited about Secretary Burgum coming into the administration because he had a record as governor of building more energy. We've seen sort of the opposite coming from the Interior Department, and that's the same in the Pentagon. That's the same, I think, really across the board. And so I think for Democrats to vote for something, we are going to need to understand how that vote is going to translate into more all of the above energy projects across the United States. If we can do that, if we can get that missing trust ingredient, I think we can get a deal done.
So you've teed me up perfectly here. So you introduced the Freedom Act in the House, bipartisan bill, 3 Republicans, 3 Democrats. A lot of the permitting debate to this point has focused on getting to yes faster. But your bill is all about making sure that when a project gets a permit, it keeps that permit. Also, that the executive branch doesn't use the permitting process as sort of a pocket veto via all sorts of delays. And certainly we're seeing that with this admin. We also certainly saw it with the last admin as well. I think there's a sense that the more that admins sort of push out the boundaries of what is deemed sort of allowable or acceptable behavior, without some sort of legislative fix, this might only get worse. So, can you speak to more broadly to the inspiration behind this bill, how you've been thinking about it, and sort of, how you hope to see it get integrated into this package?
The Freedom Act is all about trying to get the politics out of permitting and making sure that projects are built if they pencil out and if they actually reduce costs and get more energy, as opposed to paying the right person or, being friends with the right politician. That's not a great way to move forward energy projects. I'm old enough to remember during the Obama administration when Republicans talked a lot about the importance of certainty. We need business certainty. We need to make sure that this business climate is actually going to be consistent for the long haul, because energy projects take decades and decades, and we need that certainty to make that investment and good use of our capital. The same is true right now. A lot of Republicans feel burned by the Keystone Pipeline and some of the decisions made by the Obama and Biden administrations. And now Democrats feel pretty burned by what's happened with a number of offshore wind projects and solar projects that have been days, months away from completion and then canceled at the last minute, not because they didn't make financial sense, not because they weren't wildly popular, but because they didn't have the right amount of political support. That is a terrible way to run a country. We need to make sure that the permit process is based on merit, based on project success. And that's what this bipartisan Freedom Act is all about. It's trying to make sure that the best projects succeed. And I think that should be something that Democrats and Republicans should be able to agree on.
Yeah, to your point, you're hearing a lot about permitting certainty from the oil and gas industry as well. You're seeing historically moderate folks like Congressman Reed vowing revenge for the way that wind and solar have been treated. So I think certainly all sorts of industries are looking down the next few years and thinking that they need something on this. Pivoting to nuclear here, recently posted that nuclear energy is one thing that the Trump administration is getting right and California Democrats are getting wrong. That's not something that we've historically heard from California Democrats. And so, what should California and Democrats nationally be rethinking about nuclear energy?
We need more energy, period. And we have absolutely had several decades of making it tougher to build nuclear that have led to higher energy prices. We've seen this play out in Europe, where Germany and other European countries have moved away from nuclear and ended up seeing energy prices skyrocket with the Russia-Ukraine war. We are incredibly poised for a renaissance on nuclear because of all of the investment that's gone into this sector. I used to work in entrepreneurship and with a number of tech startups, and it is incredible to see all the innovation and the founders of all of these new nuclear companies that are going out. But it's not going to mean much unless we can fix the NRC and unless we can make it easier to actually deploy new nuclear across the country. And this is something that I wish the Biden administration had been more aggressive on. And it's something that I really think the Trump administration has gotten right. Now, in California, we've done some good things. Our governor fought hard to make sure that Diablo Canyon was protected. But that's fighting the last war. I mean, protecting nuclear plants that we already have is not the same as building new nuclear plants. What we need to move into right now is making it easier to build all types of clean, firm energy. Geothermal and nuclear are really the future, especially with the rise of data centers and the new increase in energy demand that we're seeing. So I'm very hopeful. I think we've done some good bipartisan pieces of legislation. We did an important nuclear piece of legislation a couple years ago, the ADVANCE Act. There's a lot more that needs to happen here, but this is something that I think we've seen a lot of bipartisan agreement on. But we still need to put more shovels in the dirt. Until these projects are really deployed at scale, this is still just theoretical. We've seen so much investment come in. What needs to happen next is an immense amount of political will to shorten the amount of time that is spent in the planning process and increase the amount of actual deployed nuclear all across the country.
So deregulation, obviously one critical part of deploying nuclear. Are you thinking about anything beyond the regulatory side for helping to get nuclear off the ground? And maybe related, maybe unrelated. Do you think that there's a piece of the nuclear conversation that maybe Republicans aren't always getting right?
I think we have to think about every single part of the supply chain. This valley of death that we often see in innovation is very real. There's a lot of great projects that are successful in a lab or on a small pilot that have yet to be deployed at scale. And the reason for that is the lack of certainty and also the lack of financing at scale. And so I think it is going to, that's something that I think Democrats are often a little bit more excited about. The LPO and other efforts that, is now under the Trump administration. We need to make sure that we have the full long-term thinking for nuclear to make sure that we have this energy source brought to fruition. One of the things that I often hear about on energy is that the only bipartisan forms of energy are the forms of energy that are not yet at scale. Once you have an energy form that is an energy type that is actually scaled up, it becomes more polarizing. And so I think that's one of the really tricky things that we have to think about with nuclear is making sure that it stays bipartisan as we continue to grow it and deploy it.
So we were chatting backstage, and you said right now it's impossible to be a member of Congress and not hear about data centers all the time. So I have to ask you one data center question. Data center energy demand, data centers more broadly, obviously changing the energy conversation. It feels like energy deployment right now is often sort of framed within the context of powering AI. Tech companies are scrambling for power. Companies are signing nuclear and geothermal deals. Also, lots of gas in the pipeline. And there's big fights over cost allocation. Who's going to pay for which parts of powering these massive projects? So high level, huge question. How are you thinking about the way in which Congress is currently viewing this data center conversation, and sort of what direction do you hope they pull in the long run?
Yeah, I think right now, when you hear about data centers from Congress, the biggest idea is probably the bans and the moratoriums that have come out. Ultimately, I don't think those are politically successful or going to be an economically good idea, right? We want to make sure that the United States continues to be the AI leader across the country, across the world. The only way to do that is to make it easier to build more energy, especially given all of the demand, all the consumer demand that we've seen and the amount of investment that's coming in to this sector. I mean, the capital expenditures for these labs and hyperscalers is through the roof. And I'm actually very optimistic that we can find a business model that that supports consumers and ratepayers and actually lowers costs, that is supportive of the environment and deals with some of the water concerns that I hear about an awful lot, and also is able to scale up energy fast. There is so much money that's coming in. It's possible to have it be a win-win-win for everybody. The challenge is, how do you really build that trust, given that a lot of consumers are feeling pretty burned? I think of Loudoun County, which is the data center capital not far away from DC. Half of their county's property taxes come from data centers. That's a really great deal for a lot of the ratepayers, a lot of the taxpayers that don't have to pay as high property taxes because of all the data centers that have come in. And yet, consumers and voters are pretty unhappy at that deal. And so I think we have to make sure that folks actually feel the benefits of investment across their community and not the costs. And right now, the only thing that's coming clear is the costs. Part of this is not just an energy problem, it's also an AI question. If you ask most voters what they think about AI, all they think about is Dario Amodei coming out and saying half of white-collar jobs will be gone in the next couple of years. That is a really tough value proposition to get voters to get excited about a data center coming to your community. If you tell folks, we are going to make it easier to cure cancer, not in a theoretical sense, but we are actually going to do new programs at the NIH that are going to deliver real benefits. We're going to do clinical trial reform to make sure that these drugs can go through the pipeline and actually help you right now. If we can do work on education and get high dosage tutoring, which I'm really excited about through AI, if we can make sure that government services are really advanced through the use of this technology. In other words, if we can flesh out what AI actually looks like for the public good to make sure that there is clear, direct benefits to Americans right now, I think a lot of these challenges and questions around data centers will go out. But right now, the only part of that voters are actually hearing about are the costs and not much about the benefits.
So I sort of hinted at it with the first question, but I think one of the emerging tensions here is, on the one hand, there's a feeling that winning on AI, building a bunch of data centers, is really important for national security. On the other hand, there's a concern amongst some climate hawks that for the next few years, probably 5 years anyway, a lot of those data centers are going to be powered by gas. I'm curious how you think about that.
This is why we need permit reform. It's not all that complicated. Of course, that right now, the easiest technology to deploy is going to be natural gas. That's why we need to make it easier to build all of the above energy programs. If we had passed permit reform 5 years ago. Right now, I think you'd be seeing a lot more solar, a lot more wind, a lot more geothermal and nuclear. So I think this is really what a lot of folks in my party have been missing, is that if we make it easier to build all types of energy, the type of energy that's going to win is going to ultimately be clean, renewable energy. And so I think this data center and demand growth that we've seen make it more important than ever. But it demands a little bit of reflection on the part of Democrats why we have not done more to take out some of the red tape in this process. Because if we'd done that a couple years ago, we'd be in a very different situation today.
So we're in a big permitting reform moment right now that's clearly sort of dominating the discussion, particularly on the Build America Caucus side. The housing bill, also a huge deal. Next Congress, the dynamics will be different. There will be different chairmen of committees. It's looking increasingly likely that at least the House will flip. So there'll be different opportunities. So I'm curious, sort of, what are the next priorities for the Build America Caucus?
Our goal is to get an energy permitting bill done this year. I think there's no reason why we can't do that. But even if we do, there's still a lot more that's going to need to be done. Again, the details of the deal that's being discussed on Capitol Hill right now hasn't really changed in the last couple of years. There's a lot of things that wouldn't be included in that deal that are still really important. And so I think about, things like more nuclear legislation. There's a lot of executive orders. There's a lot of rule changes at the NRC, but that's going to be temporary unless it's enshrined in legislation. And so I would love to see more nuclear legislation. We just passed a whole host of geothermal bills out of Congress on suspension, which is incredible. The amount of bipartisan support for more categorical exemptions for geothermal is immense. We need to make sure that those bills are picked up in the Senate and passed into law. I think my number one goal is making sure that if and when the Democratic Party takes back control of the House, that making it easier to build more energy continues to be a goal. I think that there's going to be a lot of pressure on Democrats to put forward a platform that is going to be focused on lowering costs. There's a lot of great ideas out there on lowering costs. None of it is going to actually deliver in the long term unless we build more, unless we deal with the supply constraints in the energy market. I've seen a whole lot of proposals out there on, other types of subsidies, other things on the demand side. It's ultimately not going to be successful unless we fix the root cause of why energy has gotten more expensive across the world. And so my hope is that a caucus-wide energy platform in January is going to make it easier to build all types of energy.
Closing question here: 10 years, 20 years, maybe 50 years down the line. What's the vision for what's getting built more reliably, more quickly, more cheaply, because of the existence of the Build America Caucus?
I think we've really lost our ambition. I think that's really one of the frustrations that I have is we used to have a lot more thinking about the America that we want to build. I think about when Boris Yeltsin came to the United States during the height of the Cold War, went to an American supermarket and was just absolutely amazed by all the options and all the choice that he saw. He went back to Russia, and that was one of the things that killed the Soviet Union, was that type of story, seeing the growth and the prosperity in the United States and the options that were available to consumers. Unfortunately, I think if you think about that story today, the parallel is actually a lot of Americans going to China and going to the Shanghai Auto Show and seeing the innovation that's happening there with their electric vehicles and the electrification that's happened abroad. You can see all the investments and all the innovation that we've had. So what does success look like 10, 20 years from now? It looks like we're building enough energy that we barely even have to think about how expensive it is, that it's barely, not even a focus on how to meter it, because we've built 100 times what we need. So many problems in America that seem absolutely impossible would be fixed if we had vast amounts of abundant energy. I'm from California. California water problems are a real challenge. We often say whiskey's for drinking, water is for fighting. That's an age-old aphorism across my state. We wouldn't have water problems in California or across the country if desalination was actually inexpensive and available. The reason desalination isn't is because it's so expensive to actually get the energy required. So if we cut that energy by 70%, you would actually fix California's water problems. I think you can see that with a whole host of issues across American life, where the core bottlenecks to, things like American manufacturing really advancing is actually the cost of energy. And so what success really looks like is building enough that we don't just fix our short-term issues. We don't just make sure that ratepayers aren't paying an arm and a leg. I have ratepayers in my area that are paying more to their PG&E utility bills every month than they're sometimes paying in their rent or their mortgage, which is high enough in California already. But that we've actually fixed these long-term barriers that have held back American growth and prosperity and allow us to be the leader that we need to be.
Congressman Harder, thanks so much.
Thank you.